Next we look at Michelangelo Buonarroti. He's known as Michelangelo, and he is responsible for some of the most famous pieces of art the world has ever seen.
He was born in 1475 and he died in 1564. And like so many of the other Renaissance artists, he was from Italy. He would have known Italy as the Papal States, but today we refer to the nation as Italy. Now, it is difficult to say which of Michelangelo's works of art was really the greatest or the most famous, so we'll just start here. This is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Now, what is the Sistine Chapel? Well, the Sistine Chapel is a chapel. It is a place of worship located in the Vatican, which is the headquarters of the Catholic Church. Michelangelo painted the entire ceiling of this Sistine Chapel, and it is difficult, the size is difficult to capture in pictures. It is absolutely enormous, and Michelangelo did this single-handedly. He originally had some assistants, but evidently Michelangelo was a very difficult person to work with, very hard to please, and eventually he ended up firing all of his assistants, and he just said, listen, I'm just going to do this myself. I'm just going to do the work myself, and he did. He painted the entire ceiling, and he also painted all of the walls. You see the walls to the left and to the right. He also painted that back wall here, which represents some of the Catholic beliefs about the afterlife, for those who were good during life, and also for those who were bad. Now, here is another view of the ceiling, and what's interesting is this ceiling is actually smooth. It is curved, but it is smooth. So we see these different architectural features, these arches and these other features here. Those are pictures. Those aren't actually built into the ceiling or the walls. Those are pictures. Those are paintings by Michelangelo to make the Sistine Chapel appear to be far more ornate architecturally than it actually was. You can see here the view of the afterlife as well. Here is another view of the ceiling. This is a flat photograph of a curved ceiling, but it does help us to see and to appreciate just how detailed this work is, how many different individual figures Michelangelo had to paint in order to make this painted ceiling a reality. The most famous part of the ceiling is found right over here, almost in the middle. And this is what it looks like up close. This painting is called The Creation of Adam. Now, this figure over here is supposed to represent God, and the man over here is Adam, the first man in the Garden of Eden, according to belief. And you'll notice the fingers are about to touch. Michelangelo intended for that to represent the moment the two fingers were to touch. That was the moment that he believed God gave life to Adam and therefore to all human beings. And of course, it's always appropriate to show one more picture of the Sistine Chapel. There it is. I show this, of course, just to give you a chance to see the wall at the back one more time, the Catholic views of the afterlife, though for those who are good and for those perhaps who weren't so good. It's the only reason I'm showing this picture. Yeah. Well, Michelangelo painted this not because he wanted to. Painting the ceiling and the walls of the Sistine Chapel was not something that he wanted to do. The reason he did it was because he was forced to, literally forced to, by the Pope, Pope Julius II. For reasons unknown or for reasons we won't get into, the Pope absolutely insisted that Michelangelo paint the ceiling. The Pope insisted that Michelangelo painted the walls. But Michelangelo argued, he resisted. He said to the Pope, I'm not a painter, I'm a sculptor. The Pope said, you are what I say you are, my son. And of course, the Pope had virtually autocratic and absolute power in those days, and so Michelangelo had to do what the Pope said. This sculptor, Michelangelo always claimed to be a sculptor, not a painter. This sculptor produced some of the most famous painting work that the world has ever seen. But what about his sculptures? Well, we have an example of one of those. This is called the Pietà. Now, that word Pietà is an Italian word, and there really is no word in English that corresponds to it. Basically, it means pitiful or extremely, extremely, extremely sad. This statue represents the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, holding and cradling the body of her son Jesus after he had been killed. And there is No doubt all would agree there is nothing more sad, nothing more pitiful than a mother whose son has been killed. You can see the Pietà today. It is one of the highlights of the many historical treasures and artistic treasures that are held by the Vatican in Rome. It is behind glass, so you can't get that close to it, but it is available for public viewing, and so anyone who can get there is able to see one of the greatest and most beautiful and most famous treasures of Renaissance art. Well, there are many more examples of art by Michelangelo, but we're going to look at just one more. This is the David. Now, you may remember we looked at another statue called David. That was made of bronze. It was done by the Renaissance artist Donatello. This David is made from marble. It is 17 feet tall, and it was carved from a single piece of marble. Now, the story goes that the marble that Michelangelo used to carve David had something wrong with it. It was flawed in some way, and none of the local artists in Florence wanted it. They just said, this marble is unsuitable, it's unusable, we can't do anything with it, and nobody wanted it. In fact, the marble salesperson, the merchant, was willing to give it away for free. He basically said, listen, I don't want this thing. No one, if you're willing to haul it off, you can have it for free. So Michelangelo took it, and it took him about 3 years, but he carved arguably the greatest and most detailed and most intricate statue that has ever been created. Here's a close-up of his face. You can see the detail in the face and the hair. The entire body is incredibly detailed. It's supposed to represent the young man David in the Bible as he is about to slaughter the giant Goliath. The object in David's hand is a rock and a slingshot. And the story goes that the young man David was able to fell or kill the giant Goliath with a single shot of a rock from his slingshot. And that is what this statue David represents. This statue David is one of the greatest and most famous examples of all Renaissance art. It is done by one of the greatest and most famous examples of all Renaissance artists, Michelangelo Buonarroti.